Mr. Chairman, ranking members and congressmen, thank you. I'm happy to be here. This is an important issue, and I'm grateful for your time. My name is David Charles Grush. I was an intelligence officer for 14 years.
In July 2023, a bombshell congressional hearing made waves around the world.
I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program.
But one investigative journalist has been sounding the alarm on UFO secrets for decades.
I think it is a hugely significant moment, and I never thought I would see it in my lifetime.
George Knapp joins us now with UFOs, the best evidence. George?
There are many unanswered questions about UFOs. Speculation about some long-standing government cover-up is tough for many people to swallow. You got photos, you got movie footage, you got video. There is some kind of a phenomenon here that can't just be written off.
I've always approached it as a news story. It's not my religion, it's not a belief. I don't know what to believe even now.
Now News Nation is bringing you unprecedented access to the files of George Knapp.
I have secret stashes of files and things all over the station.
Mountains of evidence compiled from the government's own files.
No one who knew Area 51 from the inside ever talked publicly.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers.
They have between 30 and 50 alien bodies.
The government has been telling us for years that they're not real.
And how his life's work still influences the conversations on UFOs.
If it is true, it would be the biggest story in history. 36 years later, I'm still trying to figure it out.
We're in Vegas, we're on the Strip, we're on our way to meet George. He's finally agreed to meet with us. It took a long time because he's very busy. He says he gets multiple interview requests per day, but he's finally going to sit down with us at the TV station where he's worked for decades.
So this has been my office, amazingly. They've let me keep it all these years. And I have secret stashes of files and things all over the station because I'm a pack rat. I keep everything. This is where a lot of the stories that we did were created. All these things that have come out over the last couple of years started right here.
What brought you to Vegas?
I flipped a coin. I was living in Northern California. I had been the debate coach at UC Berkeley. I was tired of being broke. You know, I knew I had to do something. And I met these crazy bartenders from Las Vegas. And they told me about the town. They said, hey, you can write, you're a speaker. We know a guy in television, you can get a job there. So I moved here. We've done so many stories. You know, when I moved to Las Vegas, I didn't know there was an Area 51. I didn't know there was a Nevada test site, the most nuked place in the world. This is the center, the heart of the nuclear testing, where all these big holes, that's caused by nuclear bombs. And those bombs became tourist attractions by themselves. But all those brainiacs and scientists and engineers who amassed in Las Vegas at the same time the mob was here and showgirls, it was a really interesting historical time.
The wide variety and array of top-name entertainment is really what sets Las Vegas apart from anywhere else.
I met this bartender who was a mob guy. And he says, you want to drive a cab? So I was the worst cab driver in the history of the world. I didn't know where anything was. And during the same time, KLVX hired me as a part-time production assistant. And at night when I finished the cab driving shift, I'd go over to this nightclub, which was called the Oz, and all the mob guys were there. All the mob guys from the movie Casino would be there on a regular basis. And I got to know them. Back to KLVX, I would toil there, do whatever jobs they asked. About 2 months later, their anchorman quit, and they had open auditions to be the anchor of their newscast. I applied and I got it, and suddenly, less than a year in Las Vegas, I'm anchoring 2 newscasts. It was crazy. Could never happen again. And within a year of doing that, KLAS, Bob Stoddall, and a guy named Ned Day took notice of me, invited me to come over, and I've been here ever since. And in those days, we all did mob stories.
Like it or not, organized crime is part of our city's heritage. Mob money and mafia muscle put Las Vegas on the map.
There was so much going on. Every day was a bust, a gaming control board hearing, a trial. There was always something going on because it was the start of the push to get rid of them.
The City Commission has issued an emergency order pursuant to Nevada law, effective immediately upon service, suspending the license of the Aladdin Hotel.
And of course, because I already knew these guys, I not only had access to law enforcement, but I could talk to the mob guys. And it was really helpful to me in those formative days.
Again, like before the internet was big, I mean, was it all just files and paper?
Sure. These are mostly crime stories, cold case murder.
Would you do a file for every story, or what was your system?
Yeah.
People would mail you stuff, or I mean?
People would mail me stuff almost every day. People send me little stuff that make me homemade saucers out of tin foil. That's the stickers we hadn't made up when Mystery Wire was first created, my craggy old face there. This was sort of my little nerve center for a long time.
So you were a popular news anchor, popular investigative reporter. How did this UFO thing suddenly come into your life?
It was really a quirk. Ned Day and Bob Stoddall had broken a really big national story. They had information about a secret plane out in the Nevada desert, and it was invisible to radar. That's what our sources had said.
George Knapp's source was this man, John Lear, famed aviator, son of the founder of the Learjet, and soon to be influential in the conversation on UFOs.
Thanks for being here.
Okay, George.
To begin with, you're a pilot, an airline pilot, captain. You have held 17 different world speed records at one time or another. You're a member of the famous Lear family that all Nevadans are pretty much familiar with.
His father had developed the Learjet, and he had a passion for secret planes. So he and a group of people, they called them the interceptors, would go out into the Nevada desert and would sit outside of Area 51, the Nevada test site, to see what was flying around in the sky.
You don't sound like the kind of guy who would get hooked up in something that a lot of people would say is a bunch of nonsense.
No, it's just by coincidence that I got really interested. This about 2 years ago. My father saw a UFO and my brother did.
And one day, John Lear walks into the news station, this is in 1987, with a stack of documents, UFO documents, and he plops them on Ned Day's desk, and he says, Ned, this is the biggest story you will ever cover in your life. It's about a cover-up of massive proportions. You're going to become famous. You got to do this story. He pushes the documents over, and Ned starts reading them, and he pushes the pile back, and he tells Lear, this can't be true. If this was true, this UFO cover-up, then I'd already know about it, he says. I'm eavesdropping, as I tend to do. And I said, Mr. Lear, let me take a look at that stuff. So I read through it, and at the time I produced a little talk show, a half-hour public affairs show called On the Record.
Hello and welcome to On the Record.
And it would air on Saturday or Sunday morning at 6 or 7 o'clock. And I said, John, you want to do this show? And I put him on, and I just let him go.
I'll give you the bottom line.
Okay,
I'm not trying to sell it.
I want to hear your thesis.
I'm not trying to sell a book. I'm not trying to promote a lecture. This is based on what I've come across after intense research in the last year. And I have found out that the government has retrieved between 10 and 15 actual flying saucers, 3 of which have been in perfect condition, 1 of which they tried to fly. They have between 30 and 50 alien bodies in cryogenic storage. We even have the name of the person whose job it is to show these bodies to the heads of state and the people who are authorized to see them. They represent at least 5 different civilizations.
Okay, you mentioned the saucers and the bodies. Now, what kind of proof do you have that is true? How do you know that?
Well, let me take a look. Let me read to you first what the Air Force says about the bodies. First of all, I'm going to read from the Introductory Space Science, Volume 2, Department of Physics, United States Air Force. This is Chapter 13, Unidentified Flying Objects. Now, this is what the Air Force has the students at the Air Force Academy read. And it says, the most commonly described alien is about 3.5 feet tall, has a round head, arms reaching to or below his knees, and is wearing a silvery spacesuit or coveralls.
It blew me away. It blew away our audience. I didn't know what to make of it, really. And looking back on the tape of that show, I can see the expressions on my face. Is this for real?
Yeah.
This guy making this stuff up? He's nuts.
Coming up, opening the vault to decades of UFO bombshells.
April 25th, 1964 was the first official communication between our government and the aliens.
I've had my life threatened by them, my wife's life threatened by them.
Revelations.
What we've learned this week is that the government has lied to us about UFOs, has withheld information, has spied on UFO organizations, and has discredited UFO witnesses.
and steps the government may be taking to keep secrets.
The military has been installing secret sensors on public lands surrounding the base.
So there's your transmitter right there.
Plus, we set off to find Area 51 for ourselves.
Light just turned off again.
Welcome back. UFOs, are they real? We're talking with John Lear on the subject.
The most commonly described alien is about 3.5 feet tall and is wearing a silvery spacesuit or coveralls.
I can see the expressions on my face. Is this for real?
Yeah.
This guy making this stuff up? He's nuts.
Now, I'm not making this up. This is an Air Force. You can pick out an Air Force physics book and read this stuff. And at the end of the chapter, they go on to say, this leads us to believe in the unpleasant possibility of alien visitors to our planet, or at least of alien-controlled UFOs. Now, the picture that we have of the big head that the Air Force describes, this picture was drawn by an Army surgeon. These are one of the bodies that was recovered in the famous Roswell incident of 1947.
Tell us about that.
It was the first flying saucer that crashed and was recovered by the Army.
Originally, the Roswell Army Air Base announced it had recovered a flying saucer from a ranch outside Roswell. The story made headlines around the world, but hours later, higher up said no, it was a weather balloon. Pieces of the balloon were shown to reporters. Years later, the officer who first visited the crash site, Major Jesse Marcel, confided that the weather balloon story was a cover-up.
One thing I was certain of, being familiar with all air activities, that it was not a weather balloon, nor an aircraft, nor a missile. It was something else of which we didn't know what it was.
What was shown to reporters wasn't what he found.
The newsmen saw very little of that material, a very small portion of it. And none of the important things, like these members that had these hieroglyphics or markings on. And when the general came in, he told me not to say anything, that he would handle it.
Since Marcel's admission, scores of other witnesses have also surfaced.
And one of the surgeons that was responsible for the autopsy drew that picture.
This is an autopsy report, and you said the government goes to great lengths, the Air Force in particular, to discredit this kind of stuff. Where did this come from? How did you get this?
That came from the private collection of Leonard Stringfield, who was one of the premier researchers. He worked for the Air Force in the early 50s in a secret project reporting UFOs. Then as a civilian, he continued his private research, and this is out of his collection.
You think maybe it's a top secret area? If the Air Force actually does have them, maybe they got him here?
I'm certain they do. Up at the test site, there's a report that of the 3 that they got in perfectly good condition, at least 1 is up at the test site and has flown, and 1 was being flown as of 1981.
By us?
By us, yeah.
We mentioned at the top of the show that perhaps a breakthrough might be coming, that some of these people from MJ-12 or from the Project Blue Book who are in on the government's research and who saw some of this stuff might be ready to talk. We got about a minute left. Why don't you tell me about that?
It's our information that part of MJ-12 wants to release it, part of it doesn't. We're hoping that we can do this, but of course, as researchers, we're not aware of all the ramifications. We just know of what we're looking at. So we would like to see them release it, but we really don't know if they are.
Okay, John Lear, it's been very interesting. You keep us posted.
Sure will.
Thank you. We'll see you next week with more of On the Record.
And as soon as that aired, I started getting calls, and it didn't stop. What was the deal on that guy? Is that for real? Do you have any more information? Are you going to do that again? I realized this topic touches the pulse of the public in a way that I did not understand and did not appreciate at the time. I had him back on again the following year, and in between I started reading about UFOs, just trying to separate wheat from chaff. It's a gigantic learning curve, and figuring out what makes sense and what's real is really hard. So I tried to educate myself and get ready for that next Lear appearance, and the response from the public was even bigger.
Now, on April 25th, 1964, was the first official communication between our government and the aliens. 3 saucers landed there by prearranged agreement. It was filmed by 5 high-speed cameras, 68,000 feet of film. The reason we know this is because in 1972, when they were going to release the first information about UFOs to the public, a very knowledgeable writer, his name was Robert Emenegger, was asked by the agency to write a documentary, which he did. And they were going to release this thing, and we had the whole history of the UFOs, and the last part of the documentary was the footage of the saucer landing. But in 1973, when they're ready to go, we had Watergate. And they were faced with two problems. Number one is they didn't think the public could handle two traumatic experiences at the same time. And number two, they thought that the public would perceive this picture of aliens and spacecraft as a ploy by Nixon to divert the attention from Watergate.
The inevitable result of these charges has been to raise serious questions about the integrity of the White House itself.
So they shelved it. The documentary actually came out. It was narrated by Rod Serling, but instead of the real footage, they had drawings of these flying saucer landing, and they said, Rod Serling says,
let's look at an incident that might happen in the future, or perhaps could have happened already.
According to John Lear, this is the only snippet of real UFO footage that aired in the documentary.
You believe, in part, that the movies E.T., Close Encounters of the Third Kind, were not entirely just the creative products of some Hollywood director, that maybe there's more to that. Why don't you explain?
They were carefully guided by representatives from MJ-12, who is this organization that is in charge of the cover-up, in order to get us ready for the release of the information that there are indeed aliens.
Oh, to prepare us that the idea of benevolent aliens from outer space are going to help us out.
Unfortunately, they're not so benevolent, so they made probably one of the most disastrous mistakes when E.T. was put out. At that time was before we discovered what I call the double cross or the grand deception. And they were trying to get us used to the benevolent little creatures, but that isn't the case.
I had him on a third time in 1988, and he hinted at the time that he met this guy who was trying to get hired at this place out in the Nevada desert, and that he thought it was going to be a really big deal.
John Lear's new friend not only knew what was going on out there, he knew when and where to look to the skies.
Good evening, this is John Lear.
In March 1989, he accompanied a small group to the outskirts of Area 51. 3 Wednesday nights in a row, they watched a glowing disc rise above the mountains over Papoose Dry Lake.
Did you see that move it did? No, I didn't.
The person who initiated the desert outing was a scientist who claimed he worked at Papoose on flying saucers. That scientist was interviewed live on television in May 1989 from Lear's driveway.
What George didn't know was that this would be even bigger than John Lear. It turned out to change everything we know about the government and UFOs. Coming up, the bombshell interview that opened the floodgates.
What about aliens? Any of those up there at Groom Lake?
I really want to steer away from that right now.
The phones go crazy. I get pulled off the set. The general manager comes back. What the hell was that? Is this for real? What did you just do?
And what was discovered out in the middle of the Nevada desert.
By the way, that's Area 51 up there.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that's Groom Lake. That's Papoose Lake.
There's a movie right there to the left. See the left side of the frame?
In the spring of 1989, I'm anchoring the 5 o'clock news, and we would have a 5-minute nightly interview segment, a live interview with somebody on the set. Our guest on this particular day canceled at the last minute. I'm thinking, who could we get to fill this? I called up John Lear. I said, you said you had a guy who was going to work out there and maybe work on flying saucers in the desert. Can we talk to him? I don't even know his name. We put a silhouette, we created a silhouette interview. He used a pseudonym, and out this story comes.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs that are out there of extraterrestrial origin, and they're basically being dismantled. Some are, well, in various stages of completion, built from other parts, and they're being test flown and basically just analyzed.
You say there's 9 saucers. How are those tests going?
As far as what?
As far as whether they're successful and that sort of thing.
Oh, well, some of them are 100% intact and operate perfectly. The other ones are being taken apart. I was involved mainly in propulsion and the power source. Basically, as far as I can remember, about half of them do operate, and the other half are just been torn down basically to analyze the components to them.
Where did we get these saucers? How did they come into the hands of the government?
I haven't the slightest idea, and you have to understand the information is very compartmentalized, and I was only allowed information that pertained particularly to what I was involved in.
But I mean, couldn't our government have made them as opposed to getting them from some alien beings?
Totally impossible. The propulsion system is a gravity propulsion system. The power source is an antimatter reactor. This technology does not exist at all.
He said, well, this is technology that we do not have. We were reverse engineering it, and I didn't know what that meant. I'd never heard of it before. Taking it apart to figure out how it works and to see how we might either be able to duplicate the technology or defeat it if we had to fight against it.
In fact, one of the reasons that I'm going forward with this information, it's not only a crime against the American people, it's a crime against the scientific community, which I've been part of for some time, or actively trying to duplicate these systems, yet they are in existence now and basically in the hands of the government.
What would happen to you if the government learned that you were giving us this information?
Anything could happen. I don't know. I haven't the slightest idea.
Well, you said you referred to getting into trouble. Have you had some repercussions already?
Yeah, I've been threatened with being charged with espionage. I've had my life threatened by them, my wife's life threatened by them, and I mean, I don't know where else you can go from there.
Will the government ever tell us about the testing, and do the Soviets know about this?
The Soviets were involved at some specific point. They were kicked out of the program rather abruptly in the middle. I don't know why that was or what happened. They're not very happy about it, and as far as them revealing it, I'm sure they have every intention of claiming that all the technology was developed here, and it was absolutely not.
If the Soviets were kicked out of this testing program, why wouldn't they tell us about this?
I have no idea. They weren't allowed all the information. Apparently they had some, and we were basically trading with them. As far as whether they have discs or not, I don't know. I don't even know if they had knowledge that we actually had any there. But they were involved to some extent, and I don't know how much.
What about aliens? Any of those up there at Groom Lake?
I really want to steer away from that right now.
Is the Star Wars program in any way related to what's going on up there? I know some people believe that maybe we're building Star Wars for something other than the Soviets.
This directly taps out of the Star Wars budget, which is very hard to follow because it requires huge amounts of money. It also it taps out of a lot of other places too that would be very hard to track down. But yeah, Star Wars is directly related to it. The United States Navy is the part of the government that really maintains control over this.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us. Pretty interesting stuff you've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Well, more news in just a moment.
I mean, we couldn't get away with it now. We'd done no vetting at all, had no business doing it. He tells me this story. The phones go crazy. I get pulled off the set and pulled into the news director's office. The general manager comes back. What the hell was that? Is this for real? What did you just do? I said, look, I don't know if it's real. I have no idea. We just wanted to do an interview, but I'm going to find out.
Coming up, a concealed test site now exposed to the world.
Since those stories, tens of thousands of people have beaten a path out there to look around in the sky and to see whatever is flying around.
Wait until you see what else George uncovered at Area 51, things the government didn't want exposed.
And right here will be the time delay unit.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs, that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
And he tells this story, and out in the desert, they'd built this facility into the side of a mountain, disguised it to look like desert so it couldn't be seen from the sky. And in that facility, he said, were these 9 hangars built side by side, and each one of those hangars was a flying saucer that came from somewhere else. So how do you know they're not ours? He said, well, this is technology that we do not have.
Area 51, a now well-known military base that is synonymous with UFOs, but it's still shrouded in mystery to this day, with the exception of what George Knapp uncovered there.
The military now admits what the world already knew. It has a, quote, operating location near Groom Lake. But the Pentagon says the base has no name.
By denying the base has a name, the Defense Department hoped to forestall a lawsuit filed on behalf of base workers who claim they were exposed to toxic chemicals while working at Groom Lake.
Despite official denials, the common name for the base has always been Area 51. We recently found this 1967 government map which lists that name. Subsequent maps left the name blank.
To those who suggest that Area 51 has been shut down or moved somewhere else, there are a few points that are kind of tough to explain. For example, the bus filled with employees that comes in and out of the base several times each day.
It's still there, all right, still closely guarded, but not much of a secret anymore. By the way, that's Area 51 up there.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that's Groom Lake. That's Papoose Lake.
So where is it? Can you see it on a map at all? Any of the buildings, or is this all pre?
No, you can see some of that right there.
Yeah.
And that's the runway, and then those are some of the buildings from when that photo was taken. There is an entrance to Area 51 from here. And we've been up there to do stories on other matters. And the Department of Energy staff is always funny. They would just say, just don't look that way. Just look this way. Like, and of course I look that way.
Area 51 is about 150 miles outside of Las Vegas. We're on our way there now on a highway actually called the Extraterrestrial Highway. And this is a route that George has taken dozens and dozens of times over his career. It's not exactly an easy place to find. You can't just Google Area 51 and figure out where the entrances are. You sort of have to know what to look for. Okay, so we made it out here to Area 51. It is so eerie and quiet out here. We had to go down this long, windy dirt road off the main drag, the Extraterrestrial Highway, to get out here to the entrance. You really cannot get very close. Behind me, about a quarter of a mile, is one of the guarded entrances. There's barbed wire, there's armed guards there. We're pretty sure that they definitely know we're here. Trip after trip through the Nevada desert, George broadcasted the closest photos we've ever seen of Area 51.
These photos, never before shown in public, are about as close as anyone will ever come to seeing what the place looks like again. The dry bed of Groom Lake, corrugated metal buildings, a 3-mile-long runway, and some highly sophisticated radar and detection equipment. It's been known by many names over the years: Dreamland, the Ranch, the Skunk Works. If ever there was a place to test a secret new technology, this is it. And that's exactly what's been done here for decades. Area 51 is where Francis Gary Powers and the other U-2 pilots were trained in the 50s, and where the U-2 itself was developed. The SR-71 spy planes that spotted Soviet missiles in Cuba in the early 60s were also developed at 51. 51 is where stealth technology was nurtured, where Star Wars devices are still tested, and where all manner of CIA monkey business has been plotted and refined. The CIA built it for use in the U-2 program. This is rare footage taken from Groom Lake of some early tests. Current warning signs indicate it's an Air Force facility, but all branches of the military have used it, along with most major defense contractors. The common thread has always been EG&G, which has had the contract to operate the facility since the beginning. What goes on there today? Plenty. Highly placed sources say the base employs about 1,800 people. One of their main missions is to evaluate Russian defense systems, equipment that's in the hands of unfriendly nations like Iran and Iraq. Another program at 51 is the stealth helicopter, although the technology isn't far along. As for flying saucers, the military admits it has built these unmanned craft. It may not be a coincidence that the Air Force's only unmanned aerial vehicle squadron is based at Nellis. Whatever's flying around out there still attracts visitors from all over the world.
It's still newsworthy in Europe?
Yes. No, also in Europe, Area 51 is well known.
And this is all closed off, this whole area?
Yeah, it's a secure facility. I mean, they would used to occasionally have tours out there, but it's kind of hard to get in there now. So.
Do people live out there at all, or are they all community?
They have a little town where people will stay for a short period of time.
Our report set off a UFO stampede that is yet to diminish. Tens of thousands of people have trekked into the desert hoping to see a UFO, inspiring the extraterrestrial highway and creating a new industry for Tiny Rachel, which has become a UFO merchandise center and a hub for saucer watchers.
It probably peaked in '97, coinciding with the 50th anniversary of Roswell, because we had media out here every day.
The hype has been good to Rachel, but has given the military fits. Their secret base was no longer secret, and security officers had numerous run-ins over the years with over-exuberant alien hunters who crossed the line or came close to it. Base security resorted to high-tech spy gear, even low-flying choppers, to keep the saucer nuts out.
There's really nothing out here. It's very, very remote surrounding Area 51. We've heard stories that people have actually found surveillance equipment in the brush out here. The only strange thing that we've seen is there's this black wire that runs all along the perimeter road outside the base. George first revealed the lengths the government appeared to be taking to keep Area 51 a guarded secret, profiling a citizen whistleblower on a mission to expose it.
I found 31 or 32 of them so far.
Retired astronomer and desert rat Chuck Clark has a new hobby. He's prowled the hills and deserts of Lincoln County for several years now. Over the past few months, he's discovered the military has been installing secret sensors on public land surrounding the base. Using a frequency counter, he can tell when his vehicle has tripped the sensor. When that happens, he looks for the hard-to-spot wire atop the device.
This is our sensor right here.
Then he digs them up, takes pictures, and puts them back.
There's your transmitter right there. And we'll come around here. And right here will be the time delay unit. And you'll see it's clearly marked U.S. government property.
Clark isn't a terrorist or spy, but is angered that hikers, four-wheelers, or photographers, anyone who uses the backcountry, is being monitored by the military on public land, miles from the boundary of the base, a boundary which is clearly marked by ominous signs.
It's a little overkill, in my opinion. They have about a 25-mile buffer zone out here, and it's all terrain like this. It gets rougher as you go. Why they have to put stuff outside the line, and really it escapes me.
During the I-Team's visit last week, 2 sensors were located, and base security wrote down the plate numbers of our vehicles. We returned 5 days ago and drove to the rear entrance of Area 51. 3 days after our visit, FBI agents working with Air Force Intelligence and the Joint Terrorism Task Force raided Clark's home in Rachel and seized photos, records, and his computer. Is it legal for anyone to touch military sensors hidden on public land? The government doesn't think so, although Clark hasn't been charged with anything. Is the military trying to silence this outback gadfly?
And they're sort of paranoid about this location, and I don't see why.
After those stories, Area 51 was changed forever. It created so many headaches for the camo dudes and the people that patrol Area 51 and try to keep the public out.
The so-called camo dudes have assumed legendary status. Oddly, despite all the security headaches, the alien lore has seemingly been embraced by the military. Base personnel are regular customers at the Ailey Inn.
I let them come here and have a quiet time. I don't try and get into their own personal stuff. I don't want that, because if we started to pry, they'd back away.
Yeah, a lot of the patches and caps and things, they, probably half the guys on the base out there have them. We know guys that work there that have come in and bought things to take out there because they don't have any official things.
Since those stories, tens of thousands of people have beaten a path out there to look around in the sky and to see whatever is flying around, UFOs or secret planes. Every major news organization in the world has beaten a path to Area 51's door. A lot of them made fun of me and fun of the whole alien scenario, but they've all been out there. It's one thing to make fun of our stories about Area 51, but you've never been out there sitting in the desert night after night as we've done. You haven't interviewed the witnesses. You haven't dodged the security guards and coyotes and filed the FOIA request. You haven't done it.
Coming up, retaliation against the Area 51 whistleblower.
It's as if someone has made him disappear.
Well, they're trying to make me a non-person.
And all these years later, what secrets does Area 51 still hold?
Something's out there.
We went to find out.
Light just turned off again.
Despite the speculation, no one who knew Area 51 from the inside ever talked publicly about the saucer story.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs, that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
He tells me this story. I mean, we couldn't get away with it now. We'd done no vetting at all. I don't even know his name. I get pulled off the set and pulled into the news director's office. The general manager comes back. What the hell was that? Is this for real? What did you just do? I said, look, I don't know if it's real. I have no idea. We just wanted to do an interview, but I'm going to find out.
The live interview with the shadowy Dennis drew international attention.
Actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs.
Despite numerous inquiries and feelers, Dennis has remained anonymous until now.
Sodal, the news director, and I arranged to meet this guy. We went up to Lear's house. It was sort of an uncomfortable situation in the beginning because Lear wanted to control the whole thing. He wouldn't tell us the guy's name, but the guy had signed a guest book at the entrance to Lear's home, so I already saw his name. I knew what it was.
His real name is Robert Lazar, a young scientist with eclectic interests. The choice of Dennis was an inside joke. He says that's the name of his superior at Groom Lake. It wasn't a joke to Dennis.
He called right after and he said, "Do you have any idea what we're going to do to you now?" And I said, "Well, no." And he hung up the phone.
Lazar's story is, by any standards, fantastic. He says he's telling it in order to protect himself.
We go in there and we start talking to the guy who turned out to be Bob Lazar. He told us his life story, where he'd gone to school, where he'd worked before, and some of what he had seen out there.
He says he was hired to work at an area called S4, which is a few miles south of Groom Lake. At S4, he says, are flying saucers, antimatter reactors, and other working examples of technology that is seemingly beyond human capabilities.
Right, this came from somewhere else. I mean, as bizarre as that is to believe, but I mean, it's there. I saw it. I know what the current state of the art is, and in physics, and it can't be done.
After 3 or 4 hours of grilling him, we look at each other and go, holy crap, what if this is real? What if this is true? This would be the biggest story in history, but it's also perilous for us. If we go after it and it blows up in our face, it could destroy not only my reputation and his, but that of KLAS too.
Checking out Lazar's credentials proved to be a difficult task. He says he earned degrees in physics and electronics, but the schools we contacted say they've never heard of him. He also said he worked as a physicist at Los Alamos National Lab, where he experimented with one of the world's largest particle beam accelerators, a half-mile-long behemoth capable of generating 700 million volts. Los Alamos officials told us they had no records of a Robert Lazar ever working there. They were either mistaken or were lying. A 1982 phone book from the lab lists Lazar right there among the other scientists and technicians. A 1982 clipping from the Los Alamos newspaper profiled Lazar and his interest in jet cars. It too mentioned his employment at the lab as a physicist. We called Los Alamos again. An exasperated official told us he still had no records on Lazar. EG&G, which is where Lazar says he was interviewed for the job at S4, also has no records. It's as if someone has made him disappear.
Well, they're trying to make me a non-person.
Explain. You called where?
Well, the schools that I went to, the hospital that I was born at, past job, and essentially nothing comes up with my name in it.
He smiles, but out of futility, knowing the whole thing must sound ridiculous.
I don't think there's any secret flying saucers at Area 51. I suspect that there was something like that out there at one point because of people that I know have seen it.
So where would they be now?
Well, either they moved them further out into the Nevada test site. If you're out there at night, you will see these pockets of light that pop up in the darkness at places that do not exist. Something's out there.
After the sun goes down, it is a different vibe out here. It's almost totally pitch black. If we switch to the night vision, you can see better out here. I've never really experienced anything quite like it. There's no city lights. The military base, Area 51, is behind me. It's just wide open. The noises are interesting because it's obviously nature noises. You can hear the crickets. But then we've also heard military aircraft for the last probably hour or so. obviously doing some kind of training missions. You can hear the planes flying overhead. You can't always see them. Sometimes there's flashing lights, sometimes there's not.
There's a movie right there to the left. See the left side of the frame?
And there's also been some other lights that have sort of popped up over the mountains and also in the brush. The light just turned off again. Oh, there's a plane.
It's true. What I have seen is true. I don't know about the big story, where they came from, what they're like, but certainly these crafts came from another, not just another planet, another solar system entirely, extremely far away, and they're here.
What we've learned this week is that the government has lied to us about UFOs, has withheld information, has spied on UFO organizations, and has discredited UFO witnesses. Now, none of this proves that UFOs are real, but it does indicate a disturbing level of interest, government interest, in the subject. If the government won't tell us what it knows, what about science? Well, science is supposed to stand for the investigation of the unexplained, not the explanation of the uninvestigated. And so far, science has avoided the subject like a plague. It's like what Roy Neary, the main character in the film Close Encounters, had to say: all we want to know is what's going on.
"36 years later, and we still don't know any answers to the big questions."
Next week,
I wanted to tell you a story. It's about one of the adventures that we had. Something crashed
straight down out of the sky.
What if this is real? What if this is true? This would be the biggest story in history.
The evidence suggests we're being visited by some form of intelligence.
So they were definitely listening to you.
They were listening to my phone.
You can't imagine what pressure these people are under to cover this stuff up.
You could feel it, the eyes on you.
This is serious. It's been serious for a long time, and it's been ignored for way too long.
If you're right, everyone has been lied to.
Yeah, there's a sophisticated disinformation campaign targeting the U.S. populace, which is extremely unethical and immoral.
So you knew that the U.S. government was funding a secret program.
The keepers of the secrets are better at their job than people like us are at ours. And they're not going to let this thing go easily.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.